She lives on the other side of the Kingston. Oh, there's. Is it just? Yeah. I know.
All right, let's get started. We're running a little bit late, surprisingly. So this was supposed to start at 5:30, go till 7.
7, yes.
So hopefully we'll get everybody out of here in time to have a late dinner if you haven't already eaten. I'm Christine Rolfus. I'm the Kitsap County Commissioner for this area. District 1 is from Hansville all the way down to Highway 303, and the northern part is Silverdale, the pretty part of Clear Creek, just north of Silverdale. We are gathered here today to introduce the concept and the work that the county is embarking on this year that we are calling Year of the Rural. So for folks who were involved over the last couple of years, the county just finished its 2044 comprehensive plan, which was required to be done under state law. And that is a 20-year plan for where all the new people moving to Kitsap County will be living. And we finished that, finalized that last winter in 2024. We've turned it into the state for hopefully for approval. But most of the work that we did last year was focused around how are we going to build up our already urbanizing areas to be more dense rather than continuing to sprawl into the more rural parts of the county. And in doing that, we focused a lot of our work, and a lot of folks here were involved in the Kingston work that we did. But we focused a lot of our work on how will we make communities that are more dense, more livable. So that included things like the county's first tree canopy preservation ordinance, coming up with some design standards for density. We're embarking, while we're doing the Year of the Rural, we're also going to be doing a really intensive planning effort for Silverdale. So there's a lot going on, but when we finished the comprehensive plan in the winter, we had a lot of loose ends and related to rural policies that we hadn't finished. There was just too much to do it all in one plan. So what we agreed to do was spend this year working on rural policies. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight, is what the work plan looks like for this year. What does Year of the Rural mean? And in addition to talking about things like zoning and designs and things like that, where there also are very specific rezoning requests in different parts of the county that came in that the Board of Commissioners did not approve. We said, let's take up all these rural rezoning requests when we're doing the Year of the Rural. So there's a little bit to talk about here this evening, and then there'll be work to do for the rest of the year. I'm going to turn this over to some of the folks with the Department of Community Development who are going to do all the talking tonight, but I want to introduce them. So we got Scott Diener, who I'm turning this over to, Heather Cleveland, who's our lead for the Year of the Rural, and Alicia Adler, who seems to be like involved with everything related to marketing and communications, but I don't actually know what her job is. Is that right? All right. She's everywhere. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Scott, and I'm here to just hear the presentation, answer questions, and anticipate what we might need to be doing over the next year.
Thank you, Commissioner. Again, my name is Scott Diener. I'm a planning manager for Kitsap County Department of Community Development. I work closely with Heather. And we're really excited to kick off Year of the Rural. If you were involved in Year of the Rural back in 2011, you would recall that there was a lot of work that was done to basically kind of right-size what our rural areas and economies look like. So for example, we had a lot of urban designations that we levied in our rural areas. So we had industrial and we had commercial. but those were zones that were really tailored for our urban areas. And so back then in 2011, we kind of redesigned those zones so that it would be more rural commercial and rural industrial. We also created some employment centers with boundaries around it. So those are technically considered limited areas of more intensive rural development, but we'll just call them employment centers. So think of 12 trees as an example of an employment center. Some of the areas along 104 as you head out, employment centers. So those were some of the improvements. It was a very intensive project. It required a lot of community outreach, and we moved around to different parts of the county to engage with people. And what came out of that, not surprisingly, was people like rural Kitsap because of rural Kitsap, the way it is. And so we expect that we're going to feel the same sentiment. But the reason we're doing this is that subsequent to that Chapter 3 revision, that overhaul back then in 2011, we had another comprehensive plan come soon after that in 2016, where they wanted to lean out the comprehensive plan. And if you look at the comprehensive plan stacked, it's like this tall. The comp plan itself is like this thick. And so the goal was to try and lean that out. But in so doing, cut out a lot of the rural narratives that we really rely on when we're looking at rural development. It helps provide the goals, policies, and strategies to support rural development and keep urban development out of our rural areas. Well, that was all kind of leaned out, and we really missed that because we rely on the comp plan for a lot of our narratives and support to the hearing examiner, or support for decision making, and support to the board of county commissioners and the planning commissions for their planning commission's recommendations and board's decisions. So we're bringing that back. It's really important. We've tried to use the old lean rural chapter, and it didn't work very well. So this is something that, as a result of kind of what we would call, admittedly, a failed experiment in trying to lean out a comp plan. And I appreciate the goal of making things leaner and more easy to understand, but at the same time, it was just a little too lean. So with that's kind of the background. This is going to be a pretty intensive effort. We've got a lot of work to do in 1 year. We're less than a year now, by December. So we're going to keep everybody engaged and moving this project along. And with that, I'll turn it over to Heather.
Thanks. Thanks, Scott. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. And thank you, Commissioner Rolfes, for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. So just want to let everyone know, sorry. So presentation until 6:30, and then we'll have 30 minutes for questions and comments. Just want to let everybody know online that we'll give you an opportunity too, but please bear with us as we sort out how that works. We do have a microphone up here, but we'll wait until 6:30. Keep my eye on the clock and try to zoom along, but we will have an opportunity for questions and comments at 6:30 after my presentation. And my name is Heather Cleveland. I'm a long-range planner with Kitsap County and Department of Community Development, and I'm the lead on this project for this year. So the items that we'll go through for this presentation, the Growth Management Act. So just a little overview and background on that. Just touching a little bit on some data on rural Kitsap, the groundwork that was laid to kick off this project. We'll touch on the scope of work, timeline and roles, deliverables, approach and outcomes, community engagement, very important part of this project, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions and comments. So the Growth Management Act was passed in 1990, and it has 14 goals to balance. Several pop out here, very relevant to the rural and resource lands chapter. So natural resource lands, open space and recreation, environment, public facilities and services. So all of these need to be considered, but like it says at the bottom here, no priority order and balancing based on local circumstances. Here are the core concepts of the Growth Management Act. You can see urban, rural, and resource. So urban, just as Commissioner Rolfes has mentioned, was mentioning, growth focused, dense housing, shopping, and jobs. And that was the main focus, the growth in population, housing, and employment. And where the preferred alternative went was focusing those on the urban growth areas. The next two, also important, rural and resource. So rural protected from growth, and then large properties, rural jobs, limited commercial. And resource protected from all development includes timber, agriculture, and mining. Urban services, so sewer, sidewalks, multifamily housing, limited to urban boundaries in urban growth areas, and then generally prohibited in rural and resource lands, for example, sewer. County's history with the GMA. Many small lots, less than 5 acres in rural areas, including dense housing developments, also known as urban sprawl. Low density development in urban areas without access to urban services, sewer. So that's flip-flopped. So we're acknowledging that that exists, and it's something that we will acknowledge in the resource and the rural and resource lands chapter. Heavily subdivided shorelines, undesignated resource lands, strong public interest in maintaining these historic development patterns, and then also acknowledging invalid plans, 3 different plans in the 1990s after the Growth Management Act was initially passed. Today in Kitsap County, so urban areas, cities, city adjacent, Silverdale and Kingston, generally 5 homes per acre minimum development, predominantly single family development. Rural areas, 5, 10, 20 property, acre property sizes, and then limited denser communities such as Manchester, Suquamish, Keyport, and rural job areas, as Scott had mentioned. And then resource lands, timber limited to state lands, no commercial agriculture, mining limited to existing gravel and other pits. You don't have to read all of this, but this is just to say that the rural element is defined by the state, and I'll just list off a couple things here. So foster opportunities for small scale rural-based employment and self-employment, consistent with tourist businesses that are consistent with existing and planned land use patterns. I mentioned that tourist part. It was something that was brought up in a previous presentation. And then also be compatible with the use of the land by wildlife and for fish and wildlife habitat. So this is defined by the state, all the different things that need to be considered within the rural element. As Scott had mentioned earlier, in 2012, that was the comprehensive plan that included the rural and resource lands chapter separately, and that was also known as the Year of the Rural. That's also when the Agriculture Code was initially written and adopted. In 2016, that rural and resource lands chapter was woven into the land use chapter, and that's also where it exists in our most recently adopted 2024 comprehensive plan. So we will be looking at all of these, especially the work that was done in 2012 when it was a focus, and also acknowledging where the 2024 comprehensive plan and the growth that was intended in the urban areas is something that we will be conscious of as we're moving forward with the rural and resource lands chapter. And just also to note that this is a chapter of the full comprehensive plan. So everything that we do within the rural and resource lands chapter has to be relatable to all of the other elements, such as housing, such as economic development, and so on. So the next 2 slides are just some snapshot of data. The chart on the left shows population growth. So notice the pale blue is unincorporated rural. So it shows in 2020, 106,000. Keep in mind, yes, only unincorporated rural. And then you look into 2024, we're at 109,000. Now I want you to look at the chart here on the right. So it says at the bottom, it's rural, and our projection for the next 20 years is 4,300. So it's something that we're noticing, the increase in population, what our actual projection is. And so this is something that we'll be looking at with the rural and resource lands chapter as part of our data analysis. Another snapshot, as we begin our process of data analysis, we start to just look at the baseline, but then we also look at historic, and then we create scenarios for what the future looks like. So this is housing, noteworthy statement on the bottom. So single family residence uses are 82% of the total tax parcels in the rural area and account for 78% of the rural acres. And then I also think it's noteworthy that the second highest is mobile home housing type is the second highest. Nothing more to say about it, just that, but we will look at these, this baseline data, these snapshots, and then we'll start to dial in, like, what question are we trying to answer? What problem are we trying to solve? So the groundwork that was laid to kick off this project, Year of the Rural Project Charter was created. So having been part of the 2024 Comprehensive Plan update, once rural was deferred, that was noted multiple times, rural deferral, rural deferral. So what I work to do in the Rural Project Charter is, what does that look like? Well, it's a process. And here are the things, and I'll show you in a moment the scope of work. Here are the things that we're already lifting up that we know needs attention. We also created a community engagement plan, which you can find published on the website. So that's our framework of how are we keeping folks in the loop, as we move forward with this project. Also, we presented to the Board of County Commissioners And then that was in December to kick the project off, and then also presented to the Planning Commission. And I mentioned those two because our job as staff is to hear from you and do the analysis and put this all together and make a recommendation to the Planning Commission, to the Board of County Commissioners for them to make a decision. So that's an important part to acknowledge as part of this process. So what is the problem we are trying to solve? So the big one right now is that we want to pay attention to the rural and resource lands chapter and give it the energy and time that it needs. So that's, and we had mentioned 2012 and whatnot. So that's what we're doing. That's the beginning. But as we hone in and review things, and we have a survey and we hear back from people, we're honing into more granular questions and problems that we're trying to solve. I'm not saying these are the only ones, or even these are the ones that we'll focus in on, but these are just some examples. First question, are we up to date with the latest state legislature and state and local plans? So to help us address that, we'll be doing a gap analysis. For example, there's a new watershed plan that I'll touch on in a moment. We'll be reviewing that, and are we up to date with it? I think the easiest things for us to propose with goals, policies, and strategies, or even code updates, are we need to do this because it's required. So we want to make sure that we're up to date. And then how can Kitsap County protect agricultural land without agricultural zoning? So to help us address that, we formed an agricultural working group, and we have a steering committee within that is helping us prioritize what that means, and then help us then reach out to the greater agricultural community as we start to work through some of their concerns. Is growth in rural Kitsap aligned with the comprehensive plan? So we, as I mentioned earlier, when we're looking at population and buildable lands reports and things like that, and zoning, the land capacity and land use analysis, we'll be looking at what is the actual capacity and what will the capacity be in 20 years, and does anything need to change? And then, are we prepared for energy siting in rural Kitsap County? So this is where we'll form a energy siting work group to ask some of these questions. I will say, for example, with energy siting, not only a topic for Kitsap County, but the state and also the country. And also, I will say too, with any of this, maybe nothing changed, but we just want to take a look at it and say, are we where we need to be? The scope of work for the Rural and Resource Lands chapter includes a vision and rural character assessment. So that's part of the survey. So hopefully folks picked up the flyer. We have the survey available through March 7th. And so please participate in that. And from that, and also from the rural comments, we'll be working towards the rural vision and character. It's also defined again by the state, but we'll be taking all of that into consideration to what that means for Kitsap County and use that as our guide moving forward. Gap analysis, I already mentioned that. Rural and resource lands use analysis. Focus areas, so with rural land use, ag policy and code, I've mentioned that. Energy siting, and then open space law. Again, this could be just looking at where are we at with it. Are there any barriers? And I think that particular one falls under preservation and conservation. Rural economy, so childcare came up, and how that relates to rural and resource lands is in-home daycare. So daycare has been identified as a top priority in Kitsap County with respect to workforce development and retention. And so we'll be looking at it specifically as it relates to zoning and rural lands, and are there any barriers that we can remove? Agricultural, rural events and businesses, also known as agritourism. So this is something that has come up multiple times. And this is also a study is being done by the Department of Commerce right now. And so we're running in parallel, really appreciate that. So we'll be able to glean some information that they gather from that, perhaps best practices, what are other counties doing, or are there things that we should or could improve? And then rural housing, mobile and manufactured home parks. I mentioned that was the second highest housing type. So we'll be looking at those sites, and are there any barriers? Is this something that needs to be looked at? And also it could be like, nope, we're fine, this is where it should be, but it's something that we're going to shine a light on. Update goals, policies, and strategies. So that's another part of the Rural and Resource Lands chapter. We'll take from that 2012, we'll look at the 2016, we'll look at 2024. We'll also look at like what is relevant today, what we hear from the comments, what we hear from the survey, and start to break down what the chapter update will look like. That will be part of the comp plan moving forward. An ordinance will be drafted. I say that again because this is something that has to be adopted. And then we'll create an implementation plan. So something that's really important to me is that these are actionable things that can happen. I understand, like, it might not be able to happen. This is a 20-year plan. So what can happen now, and then what can happen in the future? So how and who will implement this? Additional work, so reclassification requests, as Commissioner Rolfes mentioned earlier, and we have some of the maps back here. Potential code updates, we say potential because we don't know yet what that could be, but that could be part of it. Updated Agricultural Advisory Council proposal. So that's a proposal that will be presented to the county commission, the commissioners in September. Administration, so a lot of administration work with something like this, and project management, and then also outreach. So just a little bit more about the reclassification request. So we have 17 applications that were deferred from the 2024 comprehensive plan. Additional information was requested at the end of February. March through May, we'll do initial staff review and land use analysis. I mentioned that because not only are we looking at the sites, but we're also looking at the overall analysis of rural Kitsap. In June, July, staff will provide additional information about the request and a preliminary recommendation. And then June, July, the docket will be updated, and then we'll move forward. Anyone else will move, whoever moves forward in that docket, whatever application moves forward, will move forward through the end to December. So another part of our important part of the project is our internal review team. So we have multiple departments that do multiple different things. And so we have scheduled 3 different meetings with our internal review team. They hear and see different things. They're working on different things already. Some of the comments or concerns that had been brought to our attention, we shared that with the internal review team and they said, hey, we're already working on that. And so I asked, can you give me some more information about that? And that's something that we will acknowledge and most likely include. But here's an example of, and then I would say the 2 that are not part of Kitsap County, different agency, is public health. And so they've joined us. And so other working groups will include other folks, but this is the internal review team that we met with already to get for the introductions and to share some, and then they will be our point person as we're hearing those concerns and connecting and understanding where they're at with things. And then collaborating with departments. Oh, let me move the little box here. So collaborate with departments, organizations, and the community. So here are just some examples. So park zoning was a comment that was brought up in the comp plan comments, and then bringing it up to the Parks Department, of course. And they said, hey, we're working on landscape zones that are in progress that I think would address that comment that was brought to our attention. So it's like, hey, in that case, perhaps zoning doesn't need to change. They're addressing it in a different way. And so that's just an example of like sometimes things come up and it's not always under, it's not part of our land use or regulations, but it is something within Kitsap County. And because we are out in the world and we have a survey, we want to make sure that we're relaying that information. Septic systems is another topic that came up with respect to technology. So brought that up and public health responded right away and said, hey, there's state code has been updated. So perhaps it's simply education that needs to happen. So that's something that we're going to have a few more conversations about. Mineral resource overlay. So the DNR commented on our comp plan saying, hey, we have new maps. We think you should use those, ensure that you have the latest information. And so we're going to compare those to our mineral resource overlays to make sure that we are acknowledging the latest data. The watershed restoration and enhancement plan, that's part of the gap analysis. So this was published recently. And so permit exempt wells, impact on water recharge, preventative actions. So that was a specific comment that came from the 2024 comp plan that may be addressed in this plan. And so again, we're going to loop around and say, hey, are we on track with this, or the changes that need to be made? And I will say, already shared some of the questions that came from the tribes with public health, and ensuring, working to ensure that we understand what the question is it being addressed, or is it something that needs to be addressed further? And then wildland urban interface. So that's something that's coming has come up at the state level. It continues to be, a proposed bill, but it also came up in conversation with the Emergency Management Department as they're updating their comprehensive emergency management plan. So he just wanted to know, hey, is this going to be part of the rural resource lands chapter? And I said, well, not yet, but let's continue the conversation about that. And these are just some examples of the things that are coming up, and we're trying to be really collaborative and make sure that we're sharing this information. Timeline. So December, we presented to the Board of County Commissioners. January, we kicked off the project. February and March, we have the survey, public meeting. You're here today. And then after this meeting, we'll begin establishing more of our work groups and conducting more interviews about specific topics. June of 2025 will be our 30% draft. So that's the first time you'll see, okay, here's what they're focused, here's what the chapter is shaken out to look like. And so that will be our 30% in June. And we will have, we're going to be hosting 3 district workshops to present those. And we'll lift up different topics that perhaps might be different, relevant to different areas of Kitsap County. And then August, September, tentative recommendation to the Planning Commission. September 2025, major milestone of the 60% draft, and that's going to be the opportunity for public comment. And that's when you'll have that, when you make that public comment, all of those will be aggregated and then shared with the commissioners and the Planning Commission and published publicly. And then all of that will be taken in. This is quite the process. So the first, after the presentation to the Planning Commission, we'll have deliberations. They might ask us some very hard questions that we have to go do more research on. And so we'll go through that. I don't know how many times, it depends. And then we'll create a findings of fact based on some of the hard questions that they had. And I really appreciated when I presented to them, they want to hear from you all because that informs their questions. So do know that these opportunities to listen and communicate with them is great, and they are listening. And then we take all of that and make the updates, and that will bring us to the 90% draft that we will present to the Board of County Commissioners in November of 2025, along with multiple deliberations with them. Again, they're hearing from you. We're iteratively working to create something that, as much as possible, everybody feels good about. And then ideally adoption in December of 2025. Here's our team and our roles. So we have Scott, and then my supervisor, Colin, myself, I'm the lead on the project. Jim Rogers, my colleague, and then we're hiring a new planner. So hopefully they'll be joining our team hopefully soon. And then Alicia Adler back there, really providing great assistance for outreach. And then Cindy Reed is our data analyst and mapper. So she will be helping us with what you see here, and then continuing to analyze what the future could look like in a variety of scenarios, along with helping us look back. So deliverables, the Rural and Resource Lands chapter update is the deliverable for the year of the rural work this year. Also the rural land use reclassification requests, and then finally rural code updates if applicable. Our approach, community engagement, is an important part of this project, including the working groups and interviews, gap analysis, land use analysis, review and research, internal review team, I already mentioned that, and then iterative updates. So having the opportunity through different steps, milestones in this project is another approach. Outcomes, we want this to be consistent with the Growth Management Act, and then also our regional plans. We want the chapter to be user-friendly and comprehensive. Plans and goals that are aspirational yet fiscally responsible. Again, that goes back to what's the implementation plan for this, just keeping one eye. And then policy direction that preserves and enhances rural character. And then finally used in project level guidance, another important component. Community engagement. So we have a website that was created that will work to keep folks up to date. I already started to break down some of those working groups with who's on it, and that will continue to evolve so folks can see who's on those. That was also, the Planning Commission was curious who's on these working groups. We want to make sure that it's represented, perhaps make a recommendation. The survey is out through March 7th, so be sure to participate in that. I mentioned interviews and working groups, and then internal review team, presentations, so small group presentations. And then also when we have the 60% draft in September and promoting that public comment period, we'll be doing, again, presentations to each of the 3 districts to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to see it, and promoting that opportunity for public comment to get feedback to help us move forward as well. Public workshops, I had mentioned June, July with that 30% draft. I mentioned the public comment period. Board testimony, that opportunity will be in November when we're at the 90%. And then ongoing updates through the newsletter and Gov delivery. And then the major outreach occurs February, March, June, July, and then again in September. Just wanted to reiterate kind of the different phases of the project. So here are the tentative working groups that have already kind of risen up as, hey, these are folks that we need to interview or form a working group. So the Agriculture Working Group Steering Committee, That was established at the very beginning as being one of the high priority topics to discuss. Managed forests, so that we have a list of names that we'll be reaching out to about that. Energy siting is another topic. Again, maybe it goes nowhere, but it's how are we feeling about this? Do we need more regulation? In-home daycare, I've mentioned that. Manufactured and mobile home parks. Equestrian is another topic that has come up. We already have a few folks that have commented on the 2024 comp plan, so we look to reach out to those folks to understand what their concerns are and how it may be addressed. Environment. So initially this was a pretty broad topic right here, but through it's come up now 2 different times that the area of focus could be for this green belts and wildlife corridors. It's come up multiple times. The tribes is another working group. So we throughout the 2024 comp plan met with the tribes every 2 weeks. Now we're meeting with them once a month, and then updating them again on this process and project. And one of their priorities is water, and that relates back to the watershed plan. And again, I think their biggest concern is who's monitoring what, and and wanting to understand better, are we where we need to be with that. And then also I had mentioned the internal review team. So these are our working groups and interviews. And as we go through the survey and the rural comments, we might identify more, but all at the same time too, at some point, we just got to put some bookends on this and move forward. Engagement to date. So we had the ad hoc agriculture working group. We've had several meetings. What we're working through with them is the strategic plan that was done along with the ag code. And then also there was a recently updated from the Kitsap Conservation District's recommendations there. So starting with those 2 plans and reports, pulling out what was successful, what didn't move forward, and then what should move forward into the future. And then along with that, looking at a proposal update for their Agricultural Advisory Council, but then also looking, I think one of their top priorities will be agricultural land preservation. Reviewing the rural comments. So just want to acknowledge to everyone that we are going through the 4 different comments periods from the 2024 plan, comprehensive plan, including the DEIS, and making sure that we're reviewing those comments, compiling them, and those will be published along with the survey summary of this is what we've heard. And that will be our starting point with kind of what our next recommendations and next steps. I mentioned earlier that the state of Washington Department of Commerce is doing an agritourism study. So I have participated in that along with some farmers. They're also looking to organize regulatory folks from different counties and all having a conversation about what should this look like moving forward. So happy that that's happening and that we can be a part of it. Specific outreach. So that means interviews, follow-ups, and then also community event like the one today. So for engagement, so survey open through March 7th, 2025. So be sure to take our survey. We also have a project webpage that we'll keep up to date and continue to add things to it. And then also we'll have a year of the rural email list, and I'm working to perhaps just let folks know when things have been updated. It'll be very brief to say like, hey, check out our website. We have this and this and this. For example, a summary of the survey results will be published. So want to keep that brief, but also want to keep you all up to date on it. And that's all I have. And I want to open it up to any questions. If you could come up to the microphone, and then I'll keep an eye on the Zoom as well. But thank you so much for coming tonight and for your attention, and happy to answer any questions or comments about the Rural and Resource Lands chapter or the Year of the Rural in general.
I'm Sean Murphy. Check. There we go. I'm Sean Murphy. I just have a couple of quick questions as far as definitions on some of the boards that we're reading here, such as what is the county's definitions of rural residential versus rural protected versus rural industrial. I'm very curious about rural industrial. Is that where farms come in? Are they rural industrial, or is that some other designation? So I'd just like to know those definitions.
Yeah. So I can tell you rural residential versus rural protected has to do with density, the number of units per acre. And then I don't know if you want to answer the part about rural industrial.
I can, but what I'd like to do is look it up on my phone and go to the code, and then I can get back with you before we leave tonight. Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I can just
once you find it.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
we can do that. And just, industrial is really meant to be industrial, so it's not for farms. It's our industrial codes, both urban and rural, recognize your traditional industrial operations, not agricultural.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? If not, that's okay. Oh, you're coming. Okay, come on up. One moment, Doug. We have somebody coming up. Thank you, though. I see you. Doug's next.
First of all, or would we be able to have access to these slides?
Yes, I can publish them on the website.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
And I see a lot of rural information here, but I don't see a lot of, like Sean mentioned, the difference between designation between rural and agriculture.
Okay.
I don't know if that's, so you have a separate working group for the ag?
We do.
Okay.
Would you like to? And
I can get some.
that sounds good. And if you could just state your name.
Cindy Alfred. Oh, cool.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cindy. So I'm hearing you want more information on ag versus industrial and just more information on the ag work moving forward in general. Okay.
So you want me to read it?
I'll have you read it.
Okay, so you had asked about the definitions. So specifically for rural industrial, this zone provides for small scale, light industrial, light manufacturing, recycling, mineral processing, and resource-based goods production, and uses that are compatible with rural character and do not require an urban level of utilities and service.
Then you want to say the density, you read the density differences.
So, rural industrial is not a zone that has any density, so you're not allowed to put in a home there. There may be some exceptions for caretaker provisions, but generally speaking, you couldn't site a home in there unless you.
But 5 acres per, 5 dwelling units per acre for rural residential. I think
Yeah.
he was asking about that too.
Oh, the rural? Okay, so that's 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres, and then rural protection is 1 dwelling unit per 10 acres. Yep. And both those zones allow agriculture.
Doug?
Hello. Would you please explain energy siting more?
Yes, so energy siting, and we'll be working to define this more, but it's definitely not something like solar panels on your house. It is like a battery storage facility that's larger. I don't know if you have any more details.
And solar farms.
And solar farms, yep. So this is bigger. Biodiesel could be another one. And so we're looking to define this further. And also, where is it currently allowed? And should there be concerns about that? So we don't have any more answers just yet, but that's what we'll be looking into. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. All right, y'all.
You taking questions now?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
I'd like some better discussion, maybe a work group on what the difference is between rural protection and rural residential. I think the rural residential is kind of a new one to me for the last couple of years anyway. And I'd like to see a better explanation of it. And number two, I wanted to see if I could get on the water work group.
Yes, if you could put your email address in the chat, I'll grab it from there and I will loop you into the water work group. And then,
All right.
yes, and then I'll also follow up with the definition, just like Scott shared with you. I'll share the 2 definitions with you, but we'll also be doing analysis of rural protection and wooded as part of this process. So more information to come, not necessarily anything to change, but we will be looking into it. And at minimum, I can send you the definitions.
Okay.
hold on for the Zoom now. Does somebody want to come up to the microphone? You could state your name.
My name is David Peterson, I live in Kingston, and I've been going before the commissioners on several occasions regarding the comp plan. I live in Gamblewood Housing, which is on the corner of 104 and 305. It's that tribal corner. We have 350 plus homes in this neighborhood that are grandfathered in since 1940. The PUD took over the water rights in 67, I believe. And what I've noticed over the years, I've lived in the same home for 30 years. And what I've noticed is through all of this work that's being done for the new comp plan, and what's ending up being is our neighborhood is basically on its own water supply. We use the Ritter Main well, and as I understand it, possibly from Kingston as well. As a grandfathered in rural residential neighborhood, we have septic systems. And since I've lived in my home, there has never been one incident of any fecal bacteria getting into the bay in any way, shape, or form. And at the same time, I'm experiencing situations with water supplies now because people want to live in that neighborhood. There's like a park in there. We have fir trees everywhere. You never even know there's 350 homes there. But my biggest concern is the water supply. When power went out a couple of weeks ago or a week ago, I was able to go and use my own restroom without having to go through other means as most people do when power goes out. We like that. We enjoy that. We enjoy having fresh well water. What I'm seeing is through the comp plan, and it seems to me that there's a lot of people, since I've been working and trying to work with DCD about the concern about the water, which is Kitsap County's #1 resource. It was said in this room, September of 23, DCD asked, what is the #1 resource in Kingston County? My wife and I raised our hands and said water. She said, you're absolutely right. What I'm seeing is the water is becoming less of a concern, and the money or capital coming into the county is more for DCD, Planning Commission, and others. But at the same time, because we're independent, we are in a position where, as Eric Baker pointed out in one of his comment periods, was that the water supplies are all connected through a wagon wheel system. And we're at the bottom of the bowl. So for us, we look at this whole situation as, is our water going to be contaminated sooner or later? Because what I've seen since 2005 and 6, we had to actually go up against Pettit Oil, which went out of business 3 years later, who wanted to put in 30,000 gallons of diesel and fuel right directly over our recharge, #1A recharge area. That's not acceptable. And it was something that they would have left. There's no contracts that say that they have to pull those tanks out of there once they've lost their business. By now, we have more problems than we have already. In addition, Strivell's Corner has the Chevron. Unfortunately, through the Department of Ecology, the contamination from that station has gone down about 20 to 30 feet. Our wellhead is 312 feet deep and is protected, thank God, by a clay layer, hard pack. And so we kind of are in a position where we believe that when you take some of these reclassification zones and things of that nature and take them and reclassify them, you're talking about some of these applications that include 400 acres. Okay, so if you calculate how many acres in Kingston there are, there's 1,296 acres. 400 acres is pretty much 1/3 the size of Kingston. The Growth Management Act, is very specific about that. The last time in October 28th, I believe it was last year, I read to the commissioners, the GMA, regulations, their stipulations, and I don't believe that a project of this nature would do nothing more than create more urban sprawl. And the reason why I say that, and it's gonna be a really bad situation for us, because we're sitting in the middle of all of this. And we've already had so much development go on around our property.
And I'll say that I'm just gonna help us move along so we can have some other people chime in too. But I do hear what you're saying, and I will say water is on our list. The tribes continue to bring it up as well. And also, we will be doing an analysis about growth with the rural and resource lands chapter as a whole.
I'll finish up with saying, improvements can be made to leadership, management, design, and materials in a myriad of ways. And can be to mitigate a project. Sometimes flooding is occurring in our neighborhood. Fires, tornadoes, accidents, motor vehicle in nature. Cyclones can determine our ability to even exist in Kickoff County. And would most assuredly make a mockery of our infrastructure. And has, on more than one occasion. A car accident on Highway 3 down in Garden. 12 plus hours before people could move. Highway 3, the road for the where they do the shipyard. Nobody went anywhere. That tells me that we don't have an infrastructure in the North Kitsap County area or in other parts of the county as well that really has failed and needs to be improved before. You have to have an infrastructure before you can actually make projects of that size. It will have a definite effect, most assuredly, like I said, sooner or later. I would propose maybe for this particular situation, because a lot of people feel pretty strongly about pushback on the number 72 ID classification one, because it's so long.
Yep.
It's not state property.
And I'm just gonna, if we could move along to the next question.
Then I'll finish with, I would ask that maybe the commissioner accept a motion for a resolution to have people vote on that particular application.
Okay.
And then that way you know for sure whether or not the people really want it or whether or not the people.
Your comments noted. Thank you. I'm gonna move us over to, I'm gonna go online and then I'll go to you. Andrew.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. On the working groups and interviews under environment, I would strongly suggest adding wetlands to the green belts and wildlife corridors. And I would very much like to be a part of that working group.
Thank you, Andrew. And please add your email address to the comments and I will take that and I'll reach out to you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna have another question in person and then we'll go back to the Zoom.
I guess my question, my first comment, I suspect a lot of people in this process are going to be primarily concerned about the future of the vast woodlands that has been managed as lumber for the lumber industry in our area. And so many people who've moved here in recent decades just kind of take for granted that we live in this wooded park setting. But as we know, as Radiant decides to sell off and exit this area, those properties are going to be vulnerable to a huge transition. And I guess my question is, does the county feel that the classifications that are available to them for that kind of established wild space or potential valuable natural resource, do we have the classifications that hold potential for preserving those? Because I mean, obviously the huge, park at the Port Gamble Forest Heritage Park. That's a great example, but it feels like it's a little limiting in terms of like what we can afford to buy as park lands. And, I guess my concern is what is it, the, environment greenbelt wildlife corridor category that's going to be kind of focusing in on that aspect of the concern?
Yes, and also we will be assessing land use in general, including rural wooded and rural protection, to look at the definition and what it covers, because preservation is a part of the rural and resource lands chapter. So I can't answer like what direction that's going to go. But yes, that could be covered under there, or it could come up somewhere else. But yes, we'll be looking into that. Mhm. I'm going to shift back over to online, and then we'll go to another question in the room. Go ahead, Doug.
Hi, I'm Doug Heyman in Indianola, Washington. And I was curious on this timeline that you're talking about, where the rural rezone comes into play, sort of how those mesh together, and in terms of, you know, what's going to stay the current zoning, and where we might get incursions like Radiant's proposal up near Port Gamble.
So the timeline for that is we will have our initial recommendation to move forward. That will be June, July. And at that time, we'll also make a recommendation of what's needed to move forward with that. You know, noting what was said here, how much more engagement needs to happen, does more engagement need to happen. But currently we're using our process to evaluate all of them, along with updating the rural and resource lands chapter. So we'll have our initial recommendation. To answer your question, our initial recommendation will be June, July, and then whatever moves forward from there will depend on that recommendation decision at that time. Does that answer your question, Doug?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. In-person question next.
Good evening. I'm Mark Libby. I work with the Kingston Parks, Trails, and Open Spaces Committee. And I have a little bit of concern about your groups. For instance, you have a child care group, but we don't have a group that represents youth for their sports activities. We've got equestrians, but we don't have bicycle groups. So the groups are kind of self-selected, which is typical of community involvement, but it's not very representative of the community as a whole. So my question to you is, what will you do to get a statistically accurate feel for what our population wants? One suggestion was a vote, but obviously canvassing and statistically sound sampling is another more practical approach. So what can you do to be sure that as we look at our use of our land, essentially, in the rural areas, and I'm a Kingston UGA resident, but I use the area outside our 1,200 acres a whole lot. And so, you know, I see that as part of our community. And I want to know how the population as a whole's input is going to be represented, not just the special groups.
Yeah, and the special groups were the highlights, and those are not limited to that. So we'll be looking at the rural comments from the comp plan, so assessing those. And so perhaps we missed something, and also just hearing from you right now. And then also we have a survey out that will help us prioritize what we're going to move forward with. So ensuring that we have representation from the community. And then also we would love to reach out more with the youth, and we're open to feedback on how best to do that. So it is something that we want more of, but we need more connections to make that happen.
Well, the surveys are another thing of self-selecting
I agree.
groups. They don't give a indication of the population as a whole. And the youth activities are a real hard one, because those are the working families, and they're out with their activities in the evenings and not here at these community meetings. So I'm not satisfied that your answer addresses how do we get a statistically competent survey of what the community's needs are in this regard.
Well, I can tell you that we'll continue to work on it, and I don't have an answer to satisfy you just yet, but there have been some ideas shared, for example, to reach out to the Navy to perhaps touch base with their workforce, which is more diverse and has families and represents different populations, to perhaps go to them And so I think it's a matter of hearing what you said right now and reaching out to them and going to where they're at, I think would make a big difference.
Well, you have demographics that will help you normalize, but you need to make the effort to do that.
I agree.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next.
Just a follow-up, to what he was just saying is I only learned about this meeting because I get a Chamber of Commerce newsletter. And so to do the survey, which we now have a couple of more days left to do that, how are people finding out about this survey? Like how are other people learning about this and, you know, this potential for community involvement to be able to access, you know, the input that's available?
So we'll continue to push it out and partner with other organizations to also help us push it out. We used Gov Delivery, which we used all of the connections that we had and folks who signed up for the comp plan updates, which I believe it's over 4,000. And so we'll continue to push out and ask folks to spread the word as much as possible to get that input. And then the checking in at that June, I think, is another opportunity to reach out to more folks, have the workshop, have the discussions. So yeah, and I'm not sure if
I can add. I think so.
Mhm.
We used a couple of different methods to get this information out. Gov Delivery is absolutely the most common way that we do that. And what that is on Kitsap County's website, you can go to a news sign up and you self-select the topics that you're interested in. And so we pull from those topics as we see it's related to the message and send that out. That was one way we did it. We also used some social media, Nextdoor, Facebook, to get information out that way. And then, as Heather mentioned, we try to work with other groups to get it shared out.
I don't know if there's any way to use, the community newspapers are also a good place to be able to post things, advance funds.
We also have a newsletter that goes out as well. So I'm encouraging you. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I just encourage you to go to that news sign up at Kitsap County and add those. Yeah.
got it. I hear you though about the newspaper and trying to find others. Yep. Next question, comment?
Yeah, Dave Bonilewski, I live in Kingston as well. Thank you, Heather. It's an amazing presentation. They're very detailed. One of my questions is around the plan centering around preserving a rural character, and how is that defined? Because I think there's almost a monolithic view that means parkland. You know, there's the state ag school, WSU, and there's the county extension. So they're being utilized to bring in, you know, a broader view of what rural really means.
Thank you for asking. And I think there's a lot of tensions in rural. And so part of the survey is helping us. We ask that, what is your vision for rural? And so, and what are your priorities for rural? So that's the challenge that we have, is recognizing that there are a lot of tensions. There's a lot of different needs, and what are we looking at for the next 20 years? So there's a definition from the state of rural character and the rural element, but what does it mean for Kitsap? And that's what we'll be working on over the next couple of months, and then also sharing that back out with the community. Do you agree with this? And we'll be using that as our, but it's not that simple, you know? Yeah, and we know that. Next.
Hello, my name is Lynn Shorn, and I'm just inquiring about home businesses in rural. And do those fit underneath your ag, rural events and businesses and Washington agritourism? Or is there a separate section for, you know, home business or
So
economic development?
it would be something different, and it is part of something that we'll be looking to as a chapter. It just hasn't been lifted up as something, you know, we only have so much time and energy, but it is part of the rural and resource lands element. Any other questions or comments? Yep.
Hi, my name's Mandy Owens from Burlington. I guess I'm a little curious on how we get into these groups. I mean, I've got a few circled here, like, that I'd like to be part of. And how those groups work, like, are they workshops like this? Will we be able to work as a community?
It depends on the topic, and we're right now is the gathering and the input and the discovery. And so sometimes, like I mentioned, the equestrian, it's a matter of somebody made a specific comment and I'm going to reach back out to them and say, hey, would you like to have a greater conversation? And, and then also I think another important part of it is to make sure that's balanced. So if somebody feels about this, how can we make sure that we have the counter to that? So all of this is in the works. So if you're interested in something like that, you could make sure you signed up back here but that's, yep.
I'd also like to point out, I've lived in this area a long time and I live in a very rural area where there was corn maze, there was paintball, there was putt-putt, there was frisbee golf, all those are gone. And I understand that we're gonna have growth, I understand all these things are gonna come. I just kind of worry about that we're erasing a lot of the rural that we had, and I don't know if we're gonna really get it back. But I would like to be part of these groups. I also didn't know there was a survey. I knew about the meeting, but I didn't know about the survey until today.
Okay.
So I'll hopefully pass that around.
Thank you. Please do. Go ahead. Thank you.
I'm Lisa Peterson, and my question is, all these reclassification zoning for rural, are they on hold right now? Or are the applications being submitted by these groups right now for individual reclassification where you look at them? I mean, are any of these already submitted applications in?
They were submitted as part of the 2024 comp plan process and were deferred to this year.
They do have their applications in, but they're all being deferred. There's no decision yet.
That's correct.
My question is how could, the site for Radiant put up a sign that says proposed, they put up a big green sign that says proposed site for the North Bishop YMCA, when really there's no decision made on that yet.
We agree, and that's not part of our decision-making process. And I believe that it's being looked into about that. And so that's been brought to our attention, but that sign, whatever is happening with respect to that is not part of our process. So, yeah,
But that's to the public, and that's where we all were wondering, was it approved? Or
No.
was it approved? And therefore, I guess maybe we need a group basic on just looking at that. So there's a whole lot of us interested in just
I know.
that piece of-
And that might be what comes out of the June, July recommendation. But we at the same time though, we have to get other things moving forward too, but we do acknowledge that this is a high priority for many people and we acknowledge that.
Because it's supposed to be managed forest. It's not. There's hardly any managed forest at all. Butchery. I mean, there are trees popping up, but I've read about the forestry of Washington. I'll go ahead and go, but anyhow, thank
Let
you.
me say something. Thank you. I just want to provide some clarity to what Lisa was talking about on one of the pieces of property that the property owner has requested a rezone. Property owner, we think it's the property owner, has put up a sign that says future home of YMCA. And that has created a lot of questions, like when did you guys approve YMCA there? It's not approved. It's a sign that I think Radiant, possibly the YMCA, I'm not sure who put it up, but the sign is there that there was no application for a YMCA.
It's just,
And I have
waiting to it.
It's so and I reported that to DCD after hearing from a few folks and seeing it myself, and they're looking into it. Thank you.
Next question, comment?
Glenn Hutchinson, I live here in Kingston as well. On your slides, you had something about collaboration. And I didn't see anything about the fire departments or districts being involved because I would imagine when you're talking about rural, that's from an emergency standpoint, they may have some input that could be very useful to you. And then additionally, just some of the questions that came up, some other groups that I'm aware of here in the North Kitsap area, the Kiwanis and Rotary may be a great solution to find other information relative to getting data points And to Mark's point about getting good stats as to, you know, what people want here in the community.
I agree. Thank you. And I will say we do have the emergency management department who is connecting us with others, but I will make sure to connect that with him.
Very
Yep. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you. This one will work. Okay.
Yeah, Jeremy Anderson with Washington Farm Bureau. Hey, we just, we're hopeful that after the public comment and the surveys and the process has been outlined, everything's gonna, you know, there's public input. And the question is really for Scott, after everything's rolled out in December, what is the appeal process? Yeah, so I just was wondering if you could kind of explain that process.
It's a 60-day appeal process after notice of intent to adopt. I don't know if that was on.
Okay, that's, yeah, speaking.
So 60-day appeal period after notice of intent to adopt or comprehensive plans, all comprehensive plan actions.
Any more questions or comments? Okay, great. Yep, go ahead.
My name is Kate. I'm from Cam Lines. And I apologize for being late. I just saw this meeting online. I do have a question. I saw that the Silverdale sign had changed. At least I noticed something different. It said urban floors and rural roofs. I thought that was a really interesting kind of concept for an incorporated location. So my question is, how are we bridging that divide? We already know that the rural roots are here in Kitsap County, every single location. My worry is that I see the rural roots being deleted or taken over by urban roots. And I'm not saying I have nothing to say about the composition of these groups or anything, but I do see corporations not necessarily taking over, but pushing aside some of these rural roots because, and it worries me as these rural roots are what have created a lot of the things that are maintained and consistent in Kitsap County. The other question I have is how do we maintain and grow and develop our rural roots as they are the source? And then how do we bridge that divide? So how do we allow the rural roots to grow into some of these urban developments? That is what I want to see. And I see it as a teacher in Central Kitsap High School for 10 years. I see the divide. I see the divide in my students. I see the divide in classrooms. I see the divide with the teachers and the administration as well. So how do we do that? And how do we make sure that organizations and groups that are in this rural communities and are not lost in the movement between this rural concept and urban concept? And then my last question would be for the two things that I happen to hear. Could we view the YMCA as possibly a bridge between those two areas if we look into the source material of the YMCA? And then also our sheriff department. I mean, I'm disappointed. I had my accounts hacked by every single country, and I made 2 sheriff reports in Farmington, Kitsap County. I had no follow-up. I made the report to the administration. I had countries that I'd never heard of accessing my account every single day, every single minute of every day, sharing documents with my students. I, as a teacher, was appalled and am appalled by the way that was handled. So if I can't go to the sheriff's office without being treated less than, I have a problem with that, you know. So it leads right into our healing system as well, but I'll refrain from going into all of that. But I do have ideas about that as well. But while we're having these conversations, let's remember our organizations that already exist, and let's try to bolster them. Let's try to make them work in this image. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading that.
Yep, thank you. And I will say, we do sometimes get comments that aren't related necessarily to the Rural and Resource Lands chapter, and we'll do the best that we can to pass the information. So thank you. Any other questions or comments? I know some folks might be leaving. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
I mentioned, earlier, the commissioners that, my question would be, if there were 6,000 homes, we did some research that were 6,000 properties that were not rented or used in the year 2024 and portions of 2023, why? I guess the question would be, what is affordable housing at this point?
That's a whole nother subject.
Yeah, I understand.
That's a tough one too, and I'm glad that I'm able to live where I am because I couldn't afford to move.
Right.
So, but again.
Thank you. Any other last comments or questions? We got one more coming from back here. Sorry, and then you're next.
Glenn from Silverdale. One of the questions or thoughts I'm having listening to the development of our rural communities. I've lived in multiple states throughout my life, and there's one common denominator in the rural communities, and that is, for the most part, when the farmer or the rural community needed something, a shed, a building, whatever, a lot of times it was just done. Now, whether that coincides with current building codes or not is a lot of rural. That's been that way everywhere I've gone. My question is this push in coinciding with the new international building codes that have been put out recently in the last few years?
I can take that. So the answer to that is yes, and it has been for as long as I've been here. So our rural areas are subject to international building codes, international residential codes for, well, the 20 years I've been in Kitsap County.
So my follow on with that, is the county going to look at being a little more lenient on waivers or variances in regards to making affordable housing more affordable and attainable for our people? Because as you look at the new building codes, there are regulations stacked that turn something that should be $80,000 to build up to $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. With that, are you guys going to start pushing into alternative building methods?
Okay, so you asked a lot of questions there, so I'll start with the first. So currently in our rural areas, there are agricultural exemptions for certain kind of buildings where they don't need to come in for a building permit. What we're finding is that people are stretching that. So they'll say that it's for a pole barn, but then you see a permit that is next door and what effectively means that pole barn has become a 3-car garage or something like that. A little different than the intent. So our fire marshal, who's also our certified building official, is looking at that in terms of year of the rural and making sure that what people are asking for is what they truly want. In terms of barriers with construction, the state requires us to adopt international building code. There's no getting around it. But what we can do is look at what barriers exist in terms of getting permits. And we are asking ourselves those questions each time we make an adoption or an amendment to code. We're asking ourselves, does this present a barrier? And sometimes it does, and we've got to wrestle with that. And sometimes those barriers can be moved. So we're having these discussions all the time with the board about what barriers present themselves and how can we make those barriers go away or actually more attainable in some cases. So these are discussions that we're having all the time. Yeah.
So the follow-up I asked about was the alternative building
Sure.
methods.
Yeah, that's really a question for the fire marshal, and he's also the manager for building and fire safety. He does all the building codes and review. We recently had somebody who proposed an idea like that, and I think there is a methodology for that to be done. So it requires engineering, right? Whenever you're going with alternative methods, it requires that you have an engineering stamp on those plans because they got to be certified by somebody that they're safe and safe for the people who are going to occupy that and for downstream owners. So yes, I believe there is. We don't see a lot of that, but I think we would welcome it. We've all seen the videos of 3D printed houses where something gets brought on site and they actually can print out a house and different ways of constructing exterior walls that are even more energy efficient than what we described now. So yeah, we would love to see that come to Kitsap County. Absolutely.
Is that gonna be reflected in planning?
I don't know if it'd be reflected in planning, but it certainly is something that we could look at in terms of trying to embrace that in our building code, which is Title 14. I mean, we welcome it. If somebody wants to talk to us about it, we would certainly embrace that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Quick follow on that. Do you find that the people are more in this area in your 20 years of experience? Are you more being seeing more barriers internationally or locally, like with the international laws or local laws?
I would say it's more for me. This is just my view.
Yeah,
it's more of a combination of national and state.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Go ahead.
My name is Colin Corey. I'm from Silverdale. When we think about the rural character and agriculture in particular, most of the time people think of big fields of row crops or fields with cows in them or large dairy facilities, that sort of thing. And my concern is the difference between that and having a small 5 or 10 acre piece of land and putting a business on there that is nothing like agriculture and how it all affects the surrounding area. Part of it can be, you're in rural residential, so you're 5 acres or bigger pieces of land. But it can still be very devastating to the people that live around this particular businesses. And I was wondering if that's going to be addressed.
Yes. So I had mentioned earlier in the working groups, when we are maybe focusing on something that is, beneficial to one group, there's often a counter group who's concerned about it. So yes, we do. I'm from Wisconsin, so we have 40 acres, plus. And so when I came here, I'm like, wow, it's very different here. So we are acknowledging that there are legacy lots that are in rural lands. And so the uses need to be acknowledged and the impacts on the neighborhoods need to be acknowledged. And so, yes, that will be part of our consideration.
Yes, my concern is not the legacy lands. It is opportunities moving into places that this is not historically what was there.
Okay.
So
something coming in.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
And its impact on surrounding property.
And I think that goes to the energy siting piece too, like just being conscious of what could move in and how does it impact folks and how do we prepare for that? So that's an example of that. And so that is something that we are looking at.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final questions or comments? Come on up.
Actually, but one thing I've noticed with all these developments going in Kitsap County, the lack of infrastructure planning. Yeah. I know that other states that you can't put a development in unless the infrastructure is there to support it. We've asked questions with the state and DCD about what are you gonna do about traffic? I'm just gonna use our specific situation where the Royal Valley development is going in. There just doesn't seem to be, the state thinks they have a solution to it, and it's just, their solution is to restripe it. So I know this isn't about rural, but we're in a rural area, which they've now added an urban cluster right in the middle of. So now we're having to deal with, that there's going to be over 700 units in that 150 acres there, and it's going to affect our traffic. It's going to affect the hospital, which is already understaffed. This sheriff's department's already cut back. She was talking about sheriffs. They don't have the staff anymore, and they apparently had their budget cut. So don't bother to call the sheriff. I just don't see that they're planning ahead. When they're putting in all these developments and making these developers happy, they're not thinking about the surrounding property owners and looking at the infrastructure that it's going to take to support all those things, school, hospital, and plant. And that needs to be addressed better.
Noted, thank you. Okay, coming up. Yep, we just have a couple more minutes.
The right to farm. For established farms like the old presses have, and other surrounding areas, and they get encroached with homes and developments. The right to farm also says if something comes into your neighborhood and you're a well-established farm, you have the rights. So, like our property is being impacted by something that we'll talk about later, but we're well established as just a rural residential single family. And we're impacted by hay sales and overbearing horse boarding facilities. So it's impacted our way of life. And so there's where our right is being neglected. So that's what I'm saying.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I'm going to close us for the evening and thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful night and stay tuned.
And then we'll be around to talk about this.
Yeah, so
I can, you have to.
I do have to speak, literally. So yeah, feel free. We have these are the reclassification requests. On the left, you'll see what the current zoning is, and on the right, you'll see what the requested zoning is. So feel free to look at those. Take a flyer. If you didn't sign in, and stay in touch. Thank you.
So what you'll see with the number of these graphics here is proposed density increases. That's gonna be an uphill battle.
I know I'm.